I am Bryce Newberger, and this is the Kinship Chronicles, Children of the Phoenix. Chapter 16. Cal strolled through the halls of the mayor's manor like it was a maze. Finding an exit was proving to be difficult. He finally stood in front of large stained glass doors with a coat rack to the side of a small table for placing belongings. He looked at the doors for a moment longer. Nope, this can't be it, he determined as he turned and walked away. Before he got too far, he heard screams coming from outside the door. Curious, he went back and opened it. To his surprise, it was an exit, but the vision he was confronted with was of fire and death. Bodies lay strewn across the streets. Ash fell like snow. The soldiers marched about, breaking, burning, and murdering. Cal recoiled from the visage in an attempt to shut the door, but a hand grabbed it from the other side and forced it open. He looked up to see a silver helmet poke his head in. Dazon strode through the battle undetected. Any who were unfortunate enough to pay him undue attention were quickly silenced. His destination was a building covered in blue tapestry that depicted a golden emblem of a hand with fire burning in the palm. The Mages Guild. Of all the buildings being burned down, the Mages Guild was still untouched. The soldiers seemed to be avoiding it or saving it for last. Dazon had no such reservations. He placed his hands on the front gate, then gave them a shove and sent them flying off their hinges. He walked casually across the front lawn and up to the giant doors. He treated them in a similar fashion, sending them crashing into the guild foyer. "Knock, knock," he stated with a cool calm. The inside of the guild was a wide-open dark stone room with dual grand staircase leading up to each side of the tower. Standing on the other side was Frederick, assistant to the regent mage. "Dazon?" He spoke the name with an air of awe. "Frederick." Dazon dropped a bit of his arrogant demeanor. He spoke the other's name as if it were a statement of acknowledgement more than a greeting. "But you went insane," said Frederick in disbelief. "Where are the other mages?" asked Dazon. "They fled because of the soldiers." "A bit fortunate for them compared to the villagers." "Don't play games with me, Frederick." Frederick sighed and shook his head. "Dazon, have you been the one hunting us?" Dazon didn't bother to defend himself. "Do you know what your actions have wrought? Do you know what Grexus plans to unleash?" "Order!" called out Artemis from atop the stairs. The regent mage stood in safety far from Dazon's reach. Frederick, standing at the base of the stairs, was between the two, both physically and emotionally. "Dazon, you were my mentor once. How could you betray us?" "You betray yourself. You were a good student, Frederick. Stand against this madness. Don't embrace it." "Strange advice from a terror," said Artemis. "I've become much more," Dazon said with cold confidence. "Enough of this! Frederick, kill him!" ordered the regent mage. The conflicted mage hesitated, then raised his hands to snap. He was wearing the same gloves as Dazon. They were a design Dazon himself had come up with while training Frederick and had been a cherished possession of the fire mage, especially since his mentor had gone missing. Now he was about to use them against its creator. "Don't do this," Dazon gave one last sincere warning. "You should have joined us, Dazon," Frederick said as he snapped and a gout of flame erupted toward Dazon, who responded by clapping his hands together, causing a rush of wind to blow the fire back at its wielder. Frederick screamed as he was burned by his own fire. The inferno subsided, and the charred ex-apprentice raised his hand to snap again. Dazon lopped the hand off with a flick of his sword, then followed up by sticking the student in the chest with his sword. Dazon paused for a moment to despair at Frederick's fate. Artemis used his pause to retreat back into his tower. Dazon bent down and ungloved the severed hand. Frederick bent up for a moment. "Sorry," he said, then collapsed. "My failure, not yours," he consoled the dead body. He rose and looked towards the stairs with hate. "No loose ends," he told himself, and ascended the tower. Cal panted with effort as he continued to run away from the soldier. He was able to slip out of the manor and was running freely through the streets. The carnage he witnessed there was traumatizing to him, but he continued on fleeing and crying. The soldier had given up on him after a short sprint, but Cal just couldn't stop. Every corner he turned, he would witness death, and that renewed his frenzied haste. As he got to the end of the merchant district, he saw a large cobblestone building that the soldier seemed to be leaving alone. He ran into the foyer and jumped over the large, heavy doors that had been knocked off its hinges. He didn't notice the dead body of Frederick laying by the stairs. His focus was on the door beyond the stairs and into the cellar. He slammed the heavy portal shut and leaned against the door, trying to calm down. His chest rose and fell, pumping air like billows stoking a fire. His sobs caused him to sputter while breathing. He crouched into a ball and placed his head between his knees. He was alone, or so he thought. He heard a faint voice deeper in the cellar calling out, "Help! Help! Help!" The voice was sad and pitiful. It scared Cal at first, but he became resolute to answer the pleas. He descended the stairs of the dark vault. The walls were stone and the furniture was old wood and iron. Flasks containing different colored liquids sat on shelves and counters accompanied by alchemical equipment. The pleas were growing louder. "Help me! Help! Help! Help!" they cried. Cal ended his search when he reached a series of cells locked by iron bars. The first cell seemed to be occupied by an inhabitant. The being was standing with his nose in the corner like a child in detention. He was shivering and shaking. Cal couldn't see his face because it was facing the back wall, but he could tell this wasn't the one asking for assistance, because the voice was still heard further down. He petitioned the occupant anyways. "Hey, mister." Cal's voice was still drenched with fear and sadness that he didn't recognize until he spoke. "Hey, mister, are you cold?" He got no reply. He raised his volume. "Hey, mister." The prisoner turned and jumped at Cal, smacking his face against the bars. The person had a gag around his mouth so he couldn't talk, and his eyes looked dead and gray. He was mouthing something through the gag, but it was unintelligible. Cal recoiled back from the eerie captive. Further down the line, he saw an arm reaching through the bars, groping at air. "Help me! Help me! Help me!" he cried. Cal denied his body's intuition to evacuate and slowly walked towards the cell. What he saw there was a nearly naked man clothed in a slim loincloth. His frame was slender and starved-looking. His shoulder was chafed and raw with blood, as if he had been in the same position, reaching out for an undeterminable amount of time. He didn't look at Cal. He just kept begging for help. "Do you need out?" Cal asked, but nothing changed the interaction. Cal looked for a key, but there was none to be found. Cal pondered the situation, then decided to test out his new trick. He touched the lock on the bars, and they exploded with a satisfying crack. The door swung freely, and the prisoner fell on his face. He finally went silent. Cal grabbed his arm. "Come on, get up," he said, pulling on the stranger. The terror snapped his attention to Cal. "Help me!" he screamed with a sadistic smile. Cal took a step back. The terror stepped closer, then jumped at him. Cal lunged back. "Help!" said the man as he bit his tongue and flecks of blood spouted out. Cal ran again towards the stairs. There was a rumble and the cobblestone collapsed around the exit, blocking Cal's path. The little boy turned and saw his pursuer rub his hands in a fast concession. Electricity sparked from the palms. "Help me!" he continued to yell as the vortex of blue energy arced and danced around him. Dazon emerged into the Regent Mage's quarters. The room was musky, dark, and riddled with ancient tomes and forbidden artifacts. Artemis stood facing the window with his back to Dazon. "Tell me, did you kill Isabel?" he asked in a monotone. "Yes, I killed the witch," Dazon replied. Artemis's head sunk. "She was my creation, my life's work." His voice was angry. "Tell me, Dazon, do you know what my art is?" In truth, Dazon had no idea what the Regent Mage's skill was in. It was his best-kept secret, though he wasn't about to play the guessing game either. Dazon held his sword defensively and moved to perform his signature snapfire when a hand emerged from the back of Artemis's cloak and fired a hand crossbow. The bolt surprised Dazon and sunk into his shoulder. Artemis threw back his regal cloak to reveal a disgusting array of extra arms stitched into his body. Each of the 4 extra hands wielded similar crossbows. Dazon was both surprised and revolted into inaction. The bolts flew at him, promising death. With only a fraction of a second to react, Dazon jumped back and clapped to send a gust of wind to slightly alter the trajectory of the missiles. Another bolt had slammed into his thigh, but beyond that, he had successfully dodged the mortal assault. With his crossbows empty and his party trick spent, Artemis jumped out of the tower window into a crash of glass. Dazon rose with effort and hobbled quickly to the window, but the Regent Mage had disappeared, and he was in no condition to give chase. He cursed himself and started to gather up intel from the Regent's files. He had barely gathered up a few letters before the building began to rumble and collapse. "Crag!" Dazon cursed. He thrust himself against the cobblestone wall and caused it to magically wrap around him in a protective ball. In the darkness of his shelter, he had a sinking feeling and felt a lot of hard jolts against his stone barrier. When he emerged from the wreckage, he found he was on the ground level amidst the rubble of the Mages Guild. A small boy emerged about a stone's throw away. "Oops," Cal said in utter confusion. He turned and looked at the stranger in black clothes. Before either could ask the other questions, two more figures emerged from the ruins. One had a gag over his mouth and had dead-looking eyes. The other was bloodied, and both were practically nude. The second one muttered, "Help me." "Terrors," spat Dazon as he ripped the two crossbow bolts from his thigh and shoulder. Thank you for listening. I'm Bryce Newberger, and this has been the Kinship Chronicles, Children of the Phoenix. If you enjoyed what you heard and you'd like to purchase the full book, then either look up New Books on the Google Play bookstore, NEU Books, or simply click the link in the description. The book is only $5, and I appreciate your support.